The desolate planet was far from any known star system. It was a world that had never seen the touch of civilization, a place where the winds howled and the skies were filled with endless dark clouds. The ground was rocky and uneven, dotted, with towering cliffs and strange, twisted trees. No one had ever dared to land here, and for good reason. But today, something had landed. The wreckage of a spaceship lay scattered across the planet's surface. Its sleek, metallic body, once a symbol of advanced technology, was now a twisted mess. Smoke still rose from the ruins, and the ship's engines lay broken in several places. It had been an accident, one that none of the passengers had survived, except for them. A group of alien girls, their skin shimmering with soft shades of violet and blue, stood amidst the wreckage. They were beautiful and powerful, capable of feats that most humans would consider impossible. But here, on this lonely planet, they were helpless. These girls weren't ordinary. They were members of a species known for their intelligence and beauty. Their people had mastered space travel, and their technology was far ahead of anything humanity had achieved. But none of that mattered now. Stranded on this unknown world, they were as vulnerable as anyone else. There were 5 of them, each one unique, yet all possessing the same grace and strength. Their long hair flowed in the harsh winds, and their bright eyes scanned the horizon, as if hoping for some sign of rescue. But nothing came. "This is hopeless," the girl at the front of the group muttered, her voice filled with frustration. Her name was Sela, and she was the leader of the group. Her violet skin glistened in the dim light of the planet's sun, and her features were sharp, almost regal. But despite her commanding appearance, she felt small in this strange, hostile world. "We've tried everything," another girl said, her voice softer but filled with the same worry. Her name was Lyra, and her eyes, a brilliant shade of blue, stared at the wreckage of their ship. "Our communication devices are fried. The engines are beyond repair. There's no way to call for help." Sela looked around, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the environment. The planet was beautiful in its own way. There was an eerie stillness to it, a silence that seemed almost unnatural. But the beauty did nothing to ease the weight of the situation. They were stranded, alone, with no way of escaping. "Maybe we should try to find food," said Tara, a young girl with pale green skin. She was smaller than the others, but just as determined. She had been the one to keep the group together after the crash, always offering ideas and solutions, even when it seemed like there were none. But Sela shook her head. "We need a plan. Finding food won't matter if we can't get off this planet. If we don't get help, we'll all die here." The other girls stood in silence. The harsh winds whipped against their faces, but it felt as though their hearts had frozen. None of them had ever been in a situation like this. They were used to being in control, used to being the ones who held the power. But here, they were weak. They were vulnerable. Hours passed in silence. The girls tried to salvage whatever they could from the wreckage. Their ship, once a marvel of alien technology, was now nothing more than a pile of useless parts. They had no tools to fix it, no way to make contact with their people. They were trapped. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the barren landscape, Sela stood at the edge of the wreckage. She could see the distant mountains, their jagged peaks cutting into the sky like the teeth of a monster. The planet seemed endless, its cold embrace surrounding them from all sides. But just as she was about to turn back, a flash of light caught her eye. It was distant at first, barely visible against the darkness of the sky. But as the light grew brighter, she realized that it wasn't just a trick of the eyes. Something was moving toward them. "A ship?" Lyra whispered, her eyes wide with hope. Sela's heart skipped a beat. Was it possible? Could someone be coming to help them? She didn't know who it could be, but the thought of rescue was almost too much to bear. She quickly ran to the others, her pulse quickening. "Get ready! We might have help. The girls hurried to gather their things and prepare for whatever might come. It could be their people, or perhaps another species who had found them. Whoever it was, they needed to be ready. The thought of being saved, of finally escaping this planet, filled them with a sense of relief and anticipation. The light grew brighter, and it wasn't long before the sound of an engine roared through the air. A small, sleek ship appeared on the horizon, cutting through the sky with surprising speed. The girls watched in awe as it descended, the ship's thrusters glowing bright blue as it landed just a few yards from the wreckage. The girls held their breath. This was it. They were being saved. But as the ship settled on the ground, the door opened, and out stepped a figure they hadn't expected. A human. The girls stared at him in disbelief. He was tall, dressed in the typical gear of a space explorer, worn but functional, with a helmet under one arm. His face was rugged, and his eyes, though tired, were sharp with determination. He didn't look like much, but to the alien girls, he might as well have been a hero. The man stood there for a moment, taking in the scene before him. The wreckage, the girls, their strange appearance. He didn't seem surprised. Instead, he walked forward slowly, his boots crunching against the rocky ground. "I'm Marcus," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I've been tracking your distress signal. Looks like you could use some help." The alien girls exchanged glances. Sella, still in shock, stepped forward. "You're human?" Marcus gave a small nod. "That's right. I've been out here exploring. Saw your ship crash. Figured I'd see if I could help." For a moment, no one spoke. The girls didn't know what to think. This human who had appeared out of nowhere was offering help. But why? He was just one man. What could he possibly do to help them? But Marcus didn't wait for a response. He simply began to assess the situation, his eyes moving over the wreckage with practiced efficiency. "Let's start with the basics," he said. "You need shelter, food, and water. I can help with that." The girls remained silent, unsure of what to say. Sella watched him closely, trying to make sense of the situation. Could a human really help them? Could they trust him? They had always seen humans as a lesser species, capable of destroying things but not creating. Now, here was one offering help, without hesitation. "Follow me," Marcus said, turning toward his ship. "Let's get you out of this mess." The sun sank lower in the sky, casting long, jagged shadows over the alien girls and the human who had just arrived. The sound of Marcus's boots crunching against the rocky ground was the only noise that broke the silence of the desolate planet. His eyes scanned the area with a focus that came from years of experience. He had seen his fair share of strange worlds, but nothing like this. The girls, on the other hand, were still trying to process what was happening. They had been stranded for what felt like an eternity, each day blending into the next. Now here was this human, someone who seemed so out of place yet so calm amidst their chaos. As Marcus approached the wreckage, he couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the alien girls. They were unlike any species he had encountered before. Their skin, glowing with soft shades of violet, blue, and green, shimmered in the fading light. Their long hair, flowing like silk, whipped around in the harsh winds, and their eyes, bright and intense, spoke of intelligence and strength. Despite their elegance, there was an undeniable vulnerability in their eyes. They were stranded, alone, and helpless. Marcus had seen his share of dangerous worlds, but there was something different about this one. The planet felt off. The wind howled through the jagged rocks, carrying with it an eerie sense of emptiness. It was a place where life struggled to survive. He couldn't understand why their ship had crashed here. From what he could gather from the wreckage, it hadn't been a mechanical failure. Something had gone wrong. Something he couldn't quite figure out. But the girls didn't need to know that. What mattered now was getting them off this planet. "I've got a ship," Marcus said, turning to face them. "It's not much, but it's better than this place. We can leave tonight if you're ready." The girls exchanged uncertain looks. They were used to being in control, used to being the ones who solved problems. But here, they were powerless. For the first time in their lives, they had no choice but to trust someone else. Sela, still the leader, stepped forward. Her heart was heavy, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes. "You're offering to help us?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with suspicion. "Why?" Marcus met her gaze. "Because I can. Because I've been tracking your distress signal for hours. And because, despite what you may think, I don't leave people stranded." His voice was calm, and his words seemed to have weight. There was no arrogance, no bravado, just a simple statement of fact. Sela looked at him for a long moment. His presence was different from anyone she had encountered before. There was something about him, something genuine. Despite his human appearance, he felt trustworthy. "All right," she said, her voice softening. "We'll follow you." Marcus gave a small nod and turned back toward his ship. The girls followed him, their feet light but filled with uncertainty. As they walked, the wind picked up, swirling around them in a dizzying dance. The desolation of the planet stretched out before them, and for a moment, all they could hear was the sound of their footsteps and the wind. It wasn't long before they reached Marcus's ship. It was smaller than the girls' ship, but it looked sturdy enough. The ship was sleek and compact, designed for exploration rather than battle. The exterior was scratched and worn, a clear sign that it had been through many journeys. But it didn't matter to the girls. To them, it was a lifeline. "Here we are," Marcus said, opening the hatch. The girls hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The interior was simple but functional. There were no frills, no fancy decorations, just the bare essentials. But it was a safe haven, at least for now. The girls settled into the seats, and Marcus began to power up the ship. As the engines hummed to life, the girls exchanged glances. They didn't know what to expect. They had been abandoned on this planet for so long that they had almost forgotten what it felt like to hope. Marcus looked over at them, his face serious. "I'll get you home," he said. "But first, we need to figure out what happened to your ship. If it was sabotaged, there could be others out there looking for you." Sela frowned, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Sabotaged?" she asked. "We don't know. All we know is that the ship malfunctioned. We were too far from any help when it happened." Marcus nodded, his fingers dancing over the control panel. "I'll run a diagnostic, but if it was sabotage, we'll have to be careful. There are a lot of dangerous people out there." Lyra, one of the younger girls, leaned forward. "Do you think it was the people we were traveling with? They left us behind. They abandoned us." Her voice wavered with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He didn't know who had left them here, but he knew the universe was full of people who would do anything to survive, no matter the cost. He turned back to the controls, his face set in a grim expression. "I don't know," he said finally, "but we'll find out." As the ship lifted off the planet's surface, the girls watched in silence. The ground beneath them grew smaller and smaller until it was nothing but a distant memory. The sky above them stretched out into the endless void, dotted with stars that seemed far too cold and distant to offer any real hope. But for the first time in days, they felt something stirring within them, a faint flicker of hope. This human, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, had given them something they hadn't had in a long time: the chance to escape, the chance to survive. Marcus focused on the controls as the ship soared through the atmosphere. His mind was already working on what needed to be done next. He needed to fix their ship, find out who was behind the crash, and most importantly, keep the girls safe. But there was something else. Something he hadn't expected. As he glanced back at the alien girls, his heart skipped a beat. Despite their differences, despite their strange appearance and their culture, there was something familiar about them. A connection, a bond. He had spent so many years alone, traveling from one world to another, but now, for the first time, he didn't feel so alone. These girls, these beautiful, intelligent, and strong creatures, had become more than just strangers. They were his responsibility, and he would do whatever it took to keep them safe. The journey was far from over, but Marcus was determined. He wouldn't let them down. The ship soared through the skies, leaving the desolate planet far behind. The alien girls sat in silence, gazing out of the windows at the vast emptiness of space. For the first time in days, they were free from the harsh winds, the rocky terrain, and the crushing weight of uncertainty. But even though they were no longer stranded, their minds were still full of questions. Sela sat near the front of the ship, her eyes fixed on the stars. Her mind was racing. The human, Marcus, had done what no one else would. He had shown up when all hope seemed lost, and he had offered them a way out. But who was he really? Why had he chosen to help them? And more importantly, how had he known? Where to find them? She turned her head to glance at him. He was seated at the controls, his hands moving expertly over the ship's instruments. There was a calmness about him, an ease that suggested he had been flying ships like this for years. Yet there was something in his eyes, a determination that made her believe he would do whatever it took to get them to safety. So, Sela began, her voice breaking the silence. "Tell us more about yourself, Marcus. Why did you come to help us?" Marcus didn't look up from the controls at first. His fingers moved across the console, checking the ship's systems, ensuring everything was running smoothly. After a moment, he replied, his voice steady but with a hint of amusement. "I told you. I tracked your distress signal. I'm an explorer. It's what I do." Sela frowned. "An explorer? You mean you travel through space alone, helping people you don't even know?" Marcus finally looked up, meeting her gaze. His eyes were warm, but there was a seriousness in them that made Sela pause. "Not exactly. I don't go looking for trouble. But when I hear a distress signal, I respond. That's what anyone would do. I couldn't just leave you there." Lyra, who had been sitting quietly next to Sela, spoke up. "You say that like it's normal, but you're human. Your species isn't known for being kind to others. You could have left us there. You should have left us there. But you didn't." The words stung, but Marcus didn't react. Instead, he gave a small shrug. "Humans are a complicated species. We're capable of great things, but we also make mistakes. I won't deny that. But there's good in us, too. I guess I'm one of the good ones." The girls exchanged glances. They had heard stories of humanity's wars and cruelty, the way humans had torn apart their own world before venturing into space. But they had also heard about the kindness of some humans, about those who stood up when others wouldn't. Marcus, for all his flaws, seemed to be one of those rare humans who chose to act with compassion rather than indifference. As the ship traveled deeper into space, the mood lightened slightly. Tara, the youngest of the girls, looked out the window at the stars. "It's beautiful," she whispered, almost to herself. Sela looked at her and smiled, a rare expression on her face. "Yes, it is." Marcus spoke again, his voice breaking. The quiet. "We'll need to stop somewhere before we head back to your homeworld. The ship's fuel is low, and I need to check on the diagnostics. I'll find a place to land, and we'll see what we can do." The girls nodded. They didn't know much about the human ship's systems, but they trusted Marcus. He seemed to know what he was doing. A few hours later, the ship descended toward a small, rocky planet. The air was thin, and the surface was barren, but there was enough to get the ship repaired and refueled. The girls stepped out into the dusty landscape, following Marcus as he led them to a small supply base that was hidden in the mountains. "This place is uncharted," Marcus explained as they walked, his voice carrying easily over the wind. "I usually stop here when I need a break. There's a human settlement on the other side of the planet, but it's better to keep a low profile. People don't always like outsiders." Sela nodded. "We understand. We've seen enough of what happens when people distrust others." Marcus led them into a small cave-like structure built into the mountainside. Inside, there were tools, supplies, and spare parts scattered about. It wasn't much, but it was enough for what they needed. The girls stood in awe of the place. It was a stark contrast to the desolate planet they had just left behind. This was a place of survival, a place where people who had nowhere else to go could make a home. It was simple, but it worked. "Get comfortable," Marcus said as he started to work on the ship's diagnostics. "We'll be here for a while." The girls found places to sit, watching Marcus as he worked. It was clear he knew what he was doing. His hands moved swiftly over the controls, checking wires, inspecting engines, and making sure everything was in order. After some time, he turned to the girls. "I'll need some help," he said. "There are a few things I can't do alone. We'll need to work together to get your ship ready." Sela stood up, her body tense. "What do you need?" Marcus smiled. "First, we need to gather some supplies. There's a few stores in the nearby settlement. I'll go, but I'll need you girls to stay here. It's safer that way." The girls agreed, though it was clear they didn't like the idea of staying behind. They were used to taking charge, not being told what to do, but Marcus had a point. The planet was dangerous, and they had to be careful. While Marcus was gone, the girls took the time to rest. They didn't speak much, but they all shared the same thoughts. Thoughts of gratitude, but also of uncertainty. Could they truly trust Marcus? Could they trust humanity? They had no way of knowing. But for now, they had to. He was their only hope. When Marcus returned a few hours later, he brought with him a cart full of supplies, food, water, and various tools that would help with the repairs. The girls helped unload the cart, working together with Marcus to get everything set up. "It'll take a few more hours," Marcus said, wiping his brow as he surveyed the progress. "But we're getting there. The ship should be ready soon." Sela looked at him, her expression serious. "We can never repay you for what you've done. But once we return home, we will ensure you are compensated. You deserve that." Marcus smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I didn't do this for payment. I did it because it was the right thing to do." The words hung in the air for a moment. The girls looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. They had never encountered anyone like Marcus before. For all their knowledge, all their beauty and strength, they had never understood the power of kindness, but now they were beginning to see it. As the day turned to night, the girls and Marcus worked together to finish the repairs. It was slow, hard work, but with every passing hour, the ship came closer to being ready. They were almost there, and, for the first time in days, the girls allowed themselves to believe in the possibility of hope. They were going to make it out of this. They were going to survive. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the barren landscape of the planet in deep, cold shadows. The small base Marcus had set up for repairs felt isolated, but it was the best shelter they could hope for. Inside, the air was warm, and the sound of the ship's engines humming softly filled the quiet. The alien girls, exhausted but hopeful, worked alongside Marcus, each contributing what they could to the final steps of the repairs. As the last of the ship's diagnostics were checked and the final repairs were made, Marcus wiped his hands on his pants and stepped back, admiring the work they had done together. "We're almost ready," he said, his voice tired but satisfied. Sela stood beside him, her violet eyes scanning the ship. "It's amazing how much we've accomplished. We couldn't have done this without your help." Marcus nodded, a modest smile on his face. "You all helped more than you know. But I think we'll be all right now. Just one more check and we'll be good to go." Lyra, who had been quiet most of the day, looked out the small window, her eyes narrowing as she stared into the distance. "What's that?" she asked, her voice filled with sudden concern. Marcus turned, following her gaze. In the distance, the faintest flicker of movement was visible on the horizon. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, but as he focused, he realized it wasn't. There were shapes moving toward them, figures that were too large and too numerous to be ignored. "They're coming," Marcus muttered under his breath. Sella's eyes widened as she stepped closer. "Who is it? What do you mean, coming?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. His mind was already racing, considering all the possibilities. He had been hoping that the planet's isolation would keep them safe long enough for the repairs to be completed. But now it seemed like their luck had run out. "They could be the ones who caused the crash," he said, his voice steady but serious. "Whoever they are, they're heading straight for us." The girls instinctively reached for their weapons, though they were well aware of how unprepared they were. Their technology was advanced, but it was all back on their ship. A ship that was still sitting in pieces miles away from where they stood. "We need to get out of here," Sella said, her voice sharp with urgency. "We've worked too hard to be stopped now." Marcus was already moving, pulling tools from his pack and checking the ship's systems one last time. "I'll get the engines ready. You girls stay here and keep an eye on them. If they get too close, we're going to have to fight." Tara, the youngest of the girls, was visibly shaking, but she held herself together. "We can't fight them. We don't even know who they are." "We'll figure it out," Marcus replied, his voice calm but filled with determination. "But right now, we need to make sure we have an escape route." The ground shook slightly as the figures in the distance grew larger, their movements unmistakably deliberate. They were coming closer with every passing second, and the sense of danger was palpable. The girls exchanged uneasy looks. They had never been in a situation like this before, so close to being rescued only to face an unexpected threat. "We can't just sit here," Lyra said, her voice filled with fear. "We have to do something." "We wait," Sella said firmly, her eyes locking with Marcus's. "We wait for the ship to be ready. Then we leave. There's no point in making a move until we have to." Marcus nodded. "I'll keep working as fast as I can. Just stay alert." For what seemed like hours, they waited in tense silence, the distant figures drawing closer with every minute. The ship's engines hummed steadily, but the atmosphere around them felt heavy, filled with an energy that made it difficult to think clearly. The alien girls kept watch, their eyes scanning the horizon, trying to make out any details in the distance. As the figures drew nearer, the first real glimpse of their attackers became clear. They were large, hulking creatures, clad in rough armor, with weapons slung across their backs. There were at least 20 of them, maybe more. They moved with purpose, their eyes fixed on the small base where the group was hiding. "They're not human," Sella whispered. "What do we do now?" Marcus looked over at the alien girls. He could see the fear in their eyes, but there was also something else, something stronger. He knew they could handle themselves if given the chance. But this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for trust, for the belief that they could come out of this unscathed. "They're not here to negotiate," Marcus said, his voice low and serious. "And they're not here for peace. It's up to us to stop them." The girls nodded in agreement, each one moving to take position. Sella stepped forward, her face determined. "We can't let them take us. We've come too far. We'll fight." The distant attackers were now close enough that their footsteps could be heard, the heavy thud of their boots echoing in the stillness. Marcus gave one last look to the girls. who were now standing ready, weapons drawn, faces set in steely resolve. "They'll probably try to take us by force," Marcus said, "but they don't know what they're up against." With that, the group braced themselves as the attackers arrived. The first to make contact was a massive creature, its face obscured by a helmet, its body covered in jagged armor. It let out a low growl as it approached the entrance to the base. The girls immediately took up defensive positions, ready to strike at any sign of movement. Marcus was quick to react, reaching for his own weapon, a small but powerful blaster that he always kept at his side. He took aim at the approaching creatures, his hands steady, his eyes sharp. The moment the first enemy stepped into the entrance, Sela sprang into action. With a swift motion, she lunged forward, her weapon flashing in the dim light. The creature grunted in pain as Sela's strike landed, sending it crashing to the ground. But the fight was far from over. More of the attackers surged forward, weapons raised, ready to strike. Marcus and the alien girls fought back with precision, working together as a well-coordinated team. The sound of blasters firing, the clash of weapons, and the shouts of the attackers filled the air. Marcus moved quickly, taking down 2 more of the attackers with swift, well-placed shots. The girls fought fiercely alongside him, their alien, strength and speed overwhelming their enemies. Each of them moved with a grace that belied their power, striking with pinpoint accuracy. But despite their efforts, the attackers kept coming. It became clear that this wasn't just a random attack. It was an organized effort. These creatures were after something specific, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. "We can't hold them off forever," Tara shouted, her voice tinged with panic. "We don't have to," Marcus replied, his voice calm. "The ship's ready. Let's move." With one final push, the group fought their way to the ship, the attackers hot on their heels. Sela, Lyra, and Tara took the rear, covering their retreat as Marcus led the way. They dashed toward the ship, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. The ship's hatch opened as they reached it, and they scrambled inside. The moment they were all on board, Marcus slammed the hatch shut, sealing them inside. "Hold on!" Marcus shouted as he rushed to the controls. With a roar, the ship's engines powered up, and they shot off the surface of the planet, the attackers, left behind in the dust. The girls sat in silence, breathing heavily, their bodies covered in sweat and dust. It had been a close call, but they had made it. They were alive. "We made it," Sela said, her voice soft but filled with relief. Marcus, still at the controls, glanced back at them. "Yeah, we did." But even as they sailed through space, heading toward the safety of the stars, the girls knew that their journey wasn't over. They had survived the final challenge, but there were still more questions to answer. Who had sent the attackers? And why? For now, though, they were safe. And that was enough. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound as they glided through space. The vast expanse of stars stretched endlessly around them, cold and silent. Inside the ship, the girls sat in their seats, each lost in their thoughts. It had been a long, exhausting journey from the desolate planet they had left behind, but they were safe now, for the moment. Sela gazed out of the window, her violet eyes focused on the stars. The past few days had been a whirlwind, crash landing, a fight for survival, and now they were headed home. But despite the relief, there was still something weighing on her mind. They had been through so much. They had come so close to losing everything. And yet, they were alive. "We made it," Lyra said softly, breaking the silence. Her blue eyes looked up at Sela. "We're going home." Sela nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. "Yes, but what happens now? What happens when we get back?" The other girls exchanged uncertain glances. They had never been in a situation like this before. They were warriors, explorers, survivors. But they had never faced a human like Marcus, a human who had risked everything to save them. "I don't know," Tara said, her voice quiet, "but I know I'll never forget what he did for us." Marcus, who had been quietly working at the controls, glanced back at them. "I'm glad you're all okay," he said, his voice steady. "But we're not out of the woods yet. We still need to figure out who sent those attackers after you." Sela turned to him, her expression serious. "We know you helped us, Marcus. We owe you our lives. But you need to know something. We're not like the other humans you've met. Our people, they're not always kind. They don't always appreciate outsiders. You might not be safe once we return." Marcus nodded, his face thoughtful. "I understand, but I don't regret helping you. Whatever happens when we get back, I'll be ready." The girls were silent for a moment, contemplating his words. They had been taught to view humans as just another species in the galaxy, sometimes helpful, sometimes dangerous, but always a distant, separate people. But Marcus was different. He had shown them that there was more to humanity than they had been told. "I don't want to go back to a world where we are just tools to be used," Sela said quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Our people, they've made mistakes, and we've all paid the price." Marcus looked at her, his expression softening. "I can't change what's happened, but I can promise you that not all humans are the same. You've got a chance to change things. You've already shown me what you're capable of." The girls nodded, but they weren't sure what to say. They had always believed that their people were the strongest, the smartest, and the most capable. But now they realized that there was more to survival than just strength. There was compassion, trust, and the ability to change. As the days passed, the journey back to their home world felt long. But it wasn't just the distance that stretched the time. It was the silence that had settled between them. They were all thinking about the same thing, what awaited them when they returned home. Finally, they arrived. The ship descended toward the planet's surface, the familiar sights of their homeworld coming into view. The towering cities, the lush forests, the vast oceans, everything was just as they remembered it. But something felt different now. Sela looked out the window as the ship landed. Her heart was heavy with mixed emotions. She had been away from her home for so long, but now that she was back, she didn't feel the same sense of pride that she once had. Marcus stood beside her, looking out at the planet. "This place, it's beautiful," he said softly. "It is," Sela replied. "But it's also broken." The girls stepped off the ship and onto the familiar ground of their home planet. But the moment their feet touched the soil, a wave of tension washed over them. They were no longer the same. They had seen too much, experienced too much to go back to the way things were. A small crowd had gathered near the landing site, their faces curious and cautious. Among them were some of Sela's people, officials, warriors, and leaders. They stood silently, waiting for her to approach. Sela hesitated, her mind racing. This was the moment where everything would change. She couldn't go back to the life she had known, not after everything that had happened. The leader of the group, a tall figure with silver-gray skin, stepped forward. "Sela," he said, his voice cold and formal. "You've returned." Sela met his gaze, her shoulders squared. "I have," she said, her voice firm. "But things have changed." The leader's expression faltered, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Sela glanced back at Marcus, who was standing a little behind her, watching the exchange with quiet interest. She turned back to the leader, her gaze unwavering. "I mean that our people can't keep living the way we have been. We've made too many mistakes. We've caused too much damage. It's time for a change," the crowd murmured, their eyes shifting between Sela and Marcus. Some of them seemed uncomfortable, others were curious. But Sela knew that change was coming, whether they liked it or not. "Marcus is a human," Sela continued, her voice steady. "He saved us. He showed us what it means to be kind, to be brave, and to trust. Our people need to learn that. We need to learn that. The leader's eyes hardened. This human has no place here. Sela stepped forward, her voice louder. Now. No. It is you who has no place here. Our people have been blinded by our own power, our own arrogance. It's time to see the truth. We can't keep hiding behind walls of strength. We need to learn from others. We need to open our eyes. There was a long silence. The leader's gaze flickered between Sela and Marcus. He could see the determination in her eyes, the change in her spirit, and for the first time, he hesitated. "You're asking for a lot, Sela," the leader said, his voice cold. "But perhaps you're right. Perhaps it's time for something new." Sela looked around at the people who had once been her allies. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for certain. The way things had been could no longer continue. "Marcus," she said, turning to him, "I can't promise that everyone will accept you, but we will try. We will make this work." Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just glad I could help." Sela smiled back, her heart light for the first time in days. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges ahead. But now they had a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to start something new. As they walked toward the council chambers, Sela knew that this was only the beginning. There would be many battles to fight, many obstacles to overcome, but with Marcus by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The galaxy, once vast and cold, now seemed a little smaller, a little more hopeful. And with that, they stepped forward into the unknown, ready to build a future, not just for themselves, but for everyone.